All right, welcome back to the channel. So, Canelo Alvarez is no problem for Errol Spence Jr., and Errol will make Canelo's speed advantages disappear. That, at least, is what I took from the statements that were made by Derrick James, trainer of the year, trainer of both Jermell Charlo and Errol Spence, when he was asked about a fight between Canelo Alvarez and the guy that I think is the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, Errol Spence Jr. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back, welcome back. So, I'm going to do another video related to a conversation that Ellie Sethbach had with Derrick James, the world-class trainer, trainer of the year, trainer of Errol Spence Jr., who holds the WBA, the WBC, and the the WBC and the IBF welterweight championships. He also coaches Jermell Charlo, who is a 3-belt holder and owns the WBA, the WBC, and the IBF belt, and is just one fight away from being an undisputed champion if he is allowed, and I think he will be, allowed to fight Jermell Charlo, Brian Castano for the WBO belt. So when I quote Derrick James and I talk about what Derrick James thinks about the sport of boxing, please understand that I think this guy is one of the foremost experts in boxing. I think he very well may be the best trainer in boxing. I've seen him. I was fortunate enough to see him work up close. Also, listen to him very closely. I've interviewed him on my channel. I've asked him questions, specific questions that gave me some insight into his thought process in training. And I've been in information systems and in training people for a very long time. And I got to tell you, that is what master teachers sound like. Guys that know how to deal with an individual person, knows how to work with what that particular person has, work towards that person's goal, and not necessarily making somebody like a cookie cutter of, somebody that they may want them to be. So Derrick James has been able to do two things. One, he built Errol Spence up from the ground up, knows his skill set, helped him develop the vast majority of it. And he also took somebody who was already a world-class fighter in Jermell Charlo and guided him not just to a championship, but to 3 championships in the same division, pushing on 4. So when Ellie Sethbach asks Derrick James about Canelo Alvarez, my ears, which are already gigantic, perk up, right? And I start listening. And so Derrick James is somebody that is a little bit, how can you say it, indirect, subtle, someone that is not going to say anything to offend you, and is not going to put himself on the limb or out on a limb and make it sound like he's insulting another fighter. He treated with, in this conversation, he treated Canelo Alvarez with a tremendous amount of respect, but he made a clarifying statement to Ellie Sethbach in it that let me know, or at least led me to believe, that he doesn't think Canelo Alvarez is a problem at all for Errol Spence Jr. And let me tell you what that is. Move my mic back a little bit. It's in the way of my hands. Been talking a lot more with my hands lately. You guys are going to have to get used to that. It's just a nervous habit. Anyway, so Ellie Sethbach asks him, says, hey, what do you think about, Canelo's size advantage? And he says, well, yeah, the size advantage is there. But he pointed to the fact that he believed that Canelo Alvarez's advantages at 160 and at 168, but definitely at 168. Not sure if he meant this at 160, but for sure at 168. What he said is Canelo has a speed advantage over the guys that he's fighting. And that allows him to have more success against bigger guys. His hand speed. And so Ellie Sethbach comes back and says a little bit later in the interview, he says, well, you said, you know, that Canelo's hand speed would be a problem for Errol. And he said, no, I said the hand speed would be a problem for other guys, not a problem for Errol Spence Jr. That is what so that is where I'm coming from. And then he talks about what Errol Spence does with bigger fighters and why he has to fight heavyweights and cruiserweights and like that in sparring, right? Because he's saying, look, Errol doesn't have a problem with size. He fights bigger guys all the time. And in fact, he has to spar with bigger guys because he throws so many punches during a fight that littler guys really can't take that wear and tear on them, right? Can't take the wear and tear. They can't take the beating. So he needs to fight other big guys. Now, if you've ever listened to Errol Spence talk about Canelo Alvarez himself, he's very quick to point out that Canelo Alvarez is really not that much bigger than him. He's like, yeah, he's bigger, like muscularly bigger, weighs more, but you're like, we're about the same size, about the same arm length, about the same height. So he's really not that much bigger than me. Similar to, if you notice, like Deontay Wilder. Deontay Wilder was outweighed by Luis Ortiz, I do believe, by something like 25 or 30 pounds. I don't think that Deontay Wilder walking into a fight at 215 pounds has any problem fighting guys that weigh more than him, right? Because he still has the length, right? He still has the height. All of that geometry is still in his favor. Now, one of the things that you'll notice about like a guy named Manny Pacquiao, take Manny Pacquiao for instance. When Manny Pacquiao, who they say is an 8-division champion, he's not. He's a 7-division champion, which means a lot, but he fought for the IBO against Ricky Hatton at 140. So sorry to bust that bubble. It's 7. It ain't 8, it's 7. I don't know why people count the IBO for Manny Pacquiao for some crazy reason. But regardless, if you look at the way Manny Pacquiao developed, his career went along, people said the same thing about him. It's like he's going to be too small for Oscar De La Hoya. He's going to be too small for Miguel Cotto. He's going to be too small for Margarito. He's going to be too small for these guys because he came from such a small weight class and he's really not that big a guy. What was the secret with Manny Pacquiao beating bigger guys? Speed. Speed kills. That's what they say. Speed kills. And if speed kills, then Canelo Alvarez could very well be in big trouble against people that have more speed than he does, like Landy Lara or like Austin Trout. They're not necessarily, well, actually, Landy Lara is faster of foot and hand than he is, and many people thought Canelo lost that fight, and he ain't never came anywhere near somebody like that again. So if you look at Errol Spence Jr., you look at the makeup of Errol Spence Jr., his physical makeup, you look at the fact that he is a bruising fighter. Bruising, throwing over 100 punches around consistently. And he has very fast hands. And can not just fast because of the speed of it, but also fast because of his technique and not really wasting any motion. He's a very fast-handed fighter. If you don't believe me, just go look at what he did with Mikey Garcia. It was his speed that allowed him, even though he admittedly was not in the best shape in the world, to just stay on the outside and pop him. I believe that Errol Spence Jr. has foot speed advantages over Canelo Alvarez, and he has hand speed advantages over Canelo Alvarez. And also, it's my belief that he has a work output advantage over Canelo Alvarez. Because at this point, Canelo Alvarez really is pot-shotting big guys, right? Walking them down, pot-shotting them. I don't think he's going to – Errol Spence Jr. is going to be coming at him, and he's going to be going at his body. He's going to start with his body, end with his head. Or if he ends with his head, starts with his head, he's going to end with his body. And some of the best things about Canelo Alvarez is this upper body movement. But upper body movement can be neutralized, I do believe, with straight jabs to the pit of the stomach, right? It's not that good. Let me put it this way. It's not going to be an easy fight for Canelo Alvarez at all. And if that fight is at 160 pounds, I may favor Canelo, but But I'm telling you, do not be surprised if, he gets real old and worn real quick. But anyway, that's just my take of what Derrick James said. I could be completely wrong about my interpretation. However, I think that's what he was getting at, and I logically believe that every bit of that is true. But anyway, that's just my take on the matter. You let me know what you think in the comment section. Thank you so much for your support, and I'll get you on the next one. Peace.